Ladies and gentlemen, it is Wednesday. Here we are. We are DebateSensei. We got Tim Seavey from Visolutions, San Diego State.
Wednesday.
Yeah.
And who are you?
And I am Jared Kabika Miller. I'm your debate coach, professor of communications. Matt is not here. He is taking a distillery trip around Islay in Scotland. So we'll shower him.
Yeah, I kind of hate him.
Yeah. So, but it is the first time they're letting him back on the island since the incident. So that's nice.
Is that sheep okay, by the way? Fell for him. All right.
All right.
So what do we got on the docket today?
Okay, so we're doing a deep dive on certain topics that we think you ought to know for debate rounds. Mainly, like limited prep debate, like IPDA and NPDA. This one is going to be about regulating cryptocurrency. I definitely think that cryptocurrency is going to be an issue of discussion, especially considering all of the regulatory talk I'm seeing in our news and the activity in countries as well, with cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
I mean,
China shutting stuff down has made some crazy waves.
Yeah, but there was another country that adopted it as legitimate currency. Who was that?
I saw that a bit ago too, but I didn't see that. It's been a minute. In the meantime, while Jared looks that up, though, the Fed chairman had a whole report that was published middle of September in a testimony before Congress talking about what's next. Like, should the U.S. take steps towards regulating it? Should we ban it? Should we, adopt it fully? Like, there was, a good deep dive discussion in the report that was published. And that report was, do not regulate it. Like, continue looking into things like a central bank of cryptocurrency and what that may look like, or, what the benefits and drawbacks would be. But his next phase was like, throwing it out to the public, like, hey, what should we do? Because they recognize, I appreciate, if nothing else, like maybe one of the first times that Congress recognized, like, we're old white dudes out of the loop. What should we do? And like threw it out and took in like a ton of public input and like private companies and did analysis beyond just their own, like, here's what we expect from our own Googling. And, included that in the report of like some of the potential benefits and drawbacks of regulation and like what regulation could look like. So kind of starting steps towards it. Because meanwhile, like China totally cracking down on it was like, all right, that's maybe too extreme of a path. So what alternative, and like, the other end of the spectrum, accepting it as legit currency. Do you find that company, or that country rather?
Yeah, El Salvador.
Cool. Yeah. So somewhere between El Salvador and China, there exists a happy medium. And it seems like the closest likely target for regulation would be stablecoins, or maybe like DeFi type stuff. So stablecoins being those cryptocurrencies that are pegged to the US dollar.
Right. Or whatever currency, right?
Whatever the currency happens to be. So in this case, assuming the debate is like about the US government being the actor.
So do you think that like the regulation would be that the cryptocurrency has to be a stablecoin? Like what is that?
No, it would just be like the regulation would be probably establishing a central bank, or that. So remember, like back in the day, the gold standard, right? Of like the dollar is pegged to gold. Like there is not, more than, or the value of gold or something like that. It would be whatever mechanism that was of like determining the value of gold, determining the value of the dollar, and tying them together. So I imagine that would be the Treasury Department saying that this, whatever stable coin, call it, USD or call it DAI or Tether or whatever, is equal to $1 US, and the federal government actually backing that, right? Because that means that you have a treasury giving legitimacy to a coin, and that would probably like beef up that coin really heavily. Like that would become tremendously more valuable. But the difference between a stable coin and a cryptocurrency is a stable coin is not something you invest in with the hope that it goes up. That's, the way that you would with like stocks or gold or Bitcoin or Ethereum. Like you invest in it as an asset, assuming that it will increase in value so you can buy low, sell high. Something like USD or Tether DAI, that is not that. It is meant as actual fiat that you can spend on stuff.
Right. So I think this gets into, so as I was looking into these issues, what stood out to me was that this might be one of the few topics where agent specification is something I would expect. You know what I mean? It's like the more I looked it up, there's like the main thing is like, who is going to oversee this? Is it going to be IRS? Because right now the IRS kind of treats cryptocurrency like property, right? Whereas the SEC is starting to step in and treat it like a securities. Right. And then there's the commodities board, and they're saying that it's a commodity. And so now, like, there's these three different agencies that are in charge of it in different ways. And so whoever you put in charge actually defines what a cryptocurrency is. At least in American law, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like,
or like if you say the treasury, it'll be treated as a currency, as actual just cash, basically.
Right,
If not
right.
a
And that would
bond, if
be,
not an asset, if not a security.
yeah. It would just be, yeah, and that'd be your property, right? That would be just, yeah. And so,
I mean, is that? But that's assuming that you go for something that is pegged to a dollar. I mean, that is just one other form. I think there's a better case to be made for it being its own tool, right? Like it being its own asset class. I mean, like more sophisticated investment firms these days treat it as its own separate asset class. Like you've got real estate and stocks and bonds and cash and crypto. Like it's just another thing, right? So having that kind of,
so do you
I
got
don't
to,
know. I
you have to
mean, that
generate a
would
new
require
agent?
new bodies, right? Yeah, maybe that's it. Like that's your plan, is like you establish the Department of Cryptocurrency.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
and then that could be really cool, because then you could flesh out a more well thought out plan that I think is probably harder to have just straight up disadvantages for, that are more easily prepped out. Like, okay, if the SEC gets to control it, here's all the disadvantages. If the IRS gets to say that it's an asset, here's all the disadvantages. Like, though, if you were to classify it as any one of the existing currency or existing asset classes, then there's some pretty straightforward disadvantages to each of those, or counter plans saying do something else. But if you make your own, that could be kind of an interesting plan.
But I think it also opens up the avenue for the opposition just to like prep out like two or more competitive classes, and then just say, no, you're wrong. It should not be its own thing. And here's the reasons why. And it should be considered a security.
Sure.
And then you say, it's like, and you chose the wrong agent, and here's the disadvantages for creating a new one. You know what I mean? It's like, if you really prep out reasons why it should be one of the other ones, I think you could generate some clash.
Right. Yeah. So I suppose if you do a deep enough dive to figure out this is what it really makes the most sense, like it is most similar to a bond or something like that, right? Then you can, both on the affirmative and on the negative, argue, unless the other side also comes right down with your plan, like you also have some pretty good solid ground to say, like, nope, it should instead be bond. That's kind of an interesting direction. So, but regulation, though, does not mean it has to be classified as something and then owned. Like, there's a lot of different ways that something can be regulated, right? So, similarly, like we talk about drugs a lot on this show, right? But we talk about like legalization versus decriminalization versus there's been a couple different ways. I guess I only had two off the top of my head, but like different ways that drug enforcement can be altered, or changing regulations around illicit substances. Similarly, like there's so many different ways that you can very like gently regulate something versus call it an asset and own it. The US government now gets to control this thing, or gets a central bank of this particular thing. Like that's very, very strong regulation. But if, the resolution is just something like the USFG will increase regulation on something, then doing anything is pretty straightforward, or I guess would still count. Like that would still be topical by having a more minor regulation restriction. So one that I learned about today was CTRs. So those are called currency transaction reports. So fascinating enough, I happened to be, this was not even intentional, but happened to be in a conversation with a crypto banker today. Like, that is a very fascinating job. So he was saying that in banks, all the government really cares about is knowing where money is going. Like, they want to know where transactions are flowing, especially when they're larger amounts. So if you were to walk down to your local bank branch with, over $10,000, they have to fill out a currency transaction report, a CTR, to say like, hey, federal government, this person deposited a whole ton of cash, just thought you might want to know about it. And, for the reasons that could be all kinds of like criminally tied. So what he said was, right now, there is no requirement of filling out a CTR for crypto. So if you, in any of the 5 or so banks right now that actually will deal with, cryptocurrencies, you can put as much into your account or take as much out of your account, and that does not have to be reported to the federal government in the same way. So a very, very minor regulation would just be like peeling back a little bit of the cover and saying like, hey, federal government, here are times when people are putting in big amounts or taking out big amounts of cryptocurrency.
Yeah. Now, like, kind of similar to that, I think part of it is how people use crypto to escape a lot of like capital gains taxes.
Sure.
And like one of the ways that happens is you have to know how much somebody bought for and how much they sold for. And I'm assuming that these CRTs actually play a role in that. It seems like it would, because like you're recording like how much it came out, and so that those reports are supposed to determine like what type of capital gains tax you pay. And right now there's like no way of tracking that or anything. And so the one of the advantages you could go for, like if you wanted to regulate it that way, would be like, revenue for whatever projects that we're behind on or need, infusing or something like that, or just like a fairer like taxation if you want to go for more like the fairness angle.
I think you've also got maybe like the a little bit of like the Bernie plan of like what was it, like 1% tax on stock trades, and like the ludicrous amount of money that would raise. Now the stock exchange is a very well known, constantly extremely regulated, but like very transparent source of info flow back and forth and money flowing back and forth. So that would be very straightforward to levy some percentage tax on it. If instead there was a central bank of cryptocurrency or a central bank of some stablecoin or something, that would be a like huge stamp of approval to whatever that coin was, and would allow for, just a slew of advantages. So all, some of the things that come with having a federally backed stablecoin would be like, international transfer of funds without the threat of like corruption, right? Because you now are able to flow money into places that currently you can't safely get cash to without a bunch of other intermediaries along the way, like taking a chunk out. And that can become, hugely problematic in areas of like war or of like serious corruption or governmental, like, shakiness. So this is a way of like very legitimately on a blockchain, decentralized ledger, knowing that money's got from point A to point B. And like that can even help with like humanitarian aid and like all kinds of things to get money from point A to point B, who needs it in another part of the world that there don't exist good currency infrastructure to do that. So, that's just like one area. There's so many different ways that crypto is great and will likely be around for a long time. But then if you say there's like a federally backed version of that, like sweet, we're going real. And then you can assume there's also probably going to be some tax imposed on it, like, wire transfers or something, but cheaper.
Yeah. Like some of the stuff surrounding cryptocurrency isn't just about so like the good part about having transfer of funds that is that fast and efficient is the trade. The bad part about it is that it's also becoming some of the preferred method of payment in like the criminal underworld. You know what I mean? If you're doing human trafficking and stuff like that, the use of cryptocurrency really is a lot easier than, like briefcases is full of cash, which is, a way that they used to do it. And so it's just tremendously easier. Regulating it might make it possible for so even doing like a stable coin that has the backing of the United States might actually help decrease the amount of criminal circulation of money, because you're kind of funneling that money through a centralized and federally backed bank, whereas like these other ones, might fall out of favor for it and something like that.
That's really a likely case, is like if the Fed gives their stamp of approval to, say tomorrow they call Tether their preferred stablecoin, the others would probably dwindle and die. Like, I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know enough about this space to say that with like any degree of real certainty, but I can say like somewhat just logically it would make sense that like if the value of a stablecoin is that it's supposed to be, so tied to an actual currency, if the United States federal government actually backed something, the others I would imagine would suffer pretty badly,
Yeah.
and that would end up probably just washing all the others away. Like, what's the point of trading on something that I mean, I suppose you could still say deregulation or whatever, but if there is, significantly greater tie and transparency on one and no one accepts anything else, I guess it would basically just like give an immediate black eye to all non-US backed stablecoins.
Yeah.
Because like, hey, they weren't good enough for the Fed, and others would likely follow in lockstep of saying like, hey, we want to be able to do business with the US federal government via crypto. So like, sweet, I imagine it would probably be adopted by a bunch of other, international organizations and countries. So that probably would just become like the juggernaut of stablecoins. And yeah, so that may end up cracking down on some illicit flow.
Yeah.
Kind of tough to tell.
I mean, the other sort of criminal activity is when people are just getting scammed by crypto.
Sure.
I mean, there's a number of different crypto currencies that are under investigation or already have been indicted because of extremely questionable business practices. I don't think that they were, like that. You're supposed to have some sort of leverage, on the money you say exists. You know what I mean? Like when you create this, there's certain reasons why cryptocurrencies even work, and some people cut corners on it. You know what I mean? And so, and that's why the SEC's starting to get in on it, because people are really treating this more like an investment, right? You know what I mean? It's like then it, like I know Bitcoin was supposed to be like this sort of thing that you could use to pay. Just it's like it was another version of PayPal, and as far as like user interface, right? It's supposed to be like something that you could click on when you're buying stuff, but it's turning into like an asset that people hold on to and hoping that it, like climbs.
Yeah, and it is so volatile because there's a finite number of them, right? Like there will not be more Bitcoins released after the last are mined, but stable coins are, theoretically infinite, just like money. Like you can continue printing it. There can be just infinite number of them. And so like treating those two things differently is like probably for the best. So like the Fed's report saying like, don't touch traditional cryptocurrencies. Maybe we can look into stable coins as like some of the first places to, handle start regulation. But I suppose you can kind of see China's point though, of like, we want to nip this in the bud and not have any untraceable. I mean, especially for a pretty, lockdown government like China's, you have an untraceable, like completely unregulatable asset that can flow between anybody with, access to the internet. That's probably not their style. So understandably, like having an entire asset class that also can appreciate and depreciate in value, like the fact that you could theoretically like buy, I mean, Tesla for a while was accepting Bitcoin as like legitimate currency, right? So you could have bought a Tesla when it was at its peak, and now like the Bitcoin that you've sold or that Tesla holds is worth like a quarter. I mean, crazy just how some of those things, like it's an idea and yet it's a currency, and then it now like gains and loses value so crazily. So I think like there's just a lot of uncertainty and fear around those things catching on, like becoming, I don't think anyone thinks they're going to go away, but for that to replace a traditional currency that obviously is also imaginary, like the paper in our pockets is still like this just imaginary story, but because we've all told each other so much and there's so much like, there's so much of that story woven into the fabric of our laws and our culture, we're willing to trust it. But something that doesn't have that same backing, I think it's really dicey. So I think you've got some cool stories basically on either side of the debate to tell about like how bad things could get if unregulated, or alternatively if overregulated. So I think there's probably, I don't know, maybe you tell me, like I think there's probably darker stories to be told right now of it not being regulated. Like the fact that any cartel can pay any like human trafficker in Bitcoin and there's nothing that anyone can say about it, like probably a pretty bleak, terrifying story compared to like, yeah, but what if everyone could send money for free? Like it doesn't have the same weight to it.
Yeah, yeah. I think I do think that some of the stories about how overregulation might like kill an industry, or the large majority of it, and that could, I mean, we're talking about a lot of money here, you know what I mean? And like overregulating something unnecessarily, and the fallout of that could have a ripple effect. You know what I mean? It's like, I mean, there's I think that there's impacts just to economic downturns, and this could be this could, I could say this, not it's not, you know, an exaggeration to say that this could take a big chunk out of the global economy if it's done wrong. You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so, like, you know, a global economic downturn, I think, is still worthy of an argument. You know what I mean? Like on the negative, it's like I
Sure.
think that's the low hanging fruit. Honestly, is
For sure.
the you know, it's like, listen, if you're gonna kill these things, this is people. Some people like put some serious money into this, and this is their retirement, and the only reason that it's going under is because you fiated some law saying that it has to. You know what I mean? It's like, and if it doesn't have to, like, maybe we can, you know, save their
Sure.
life savings or something like that. So
Right. Yeah. 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 I mean, it's harder to tell the like boohoo sob story of institutional investment firms, right? Because like
yeah,
there are now significant hedge funds with like enormous positions in household name cryptocurrencies that like hold huge amounts of Bitcoin and Ethereum, like, you know, big investment firms. And those investment firms losing their money doesn't sound all that tragic, but when you
right.
consider like that is a non-negligible percentage of like commerce
Yeah,
of like the flow of capital in the US. Like, so if some of the biggest hedge funds took that bad of a hit, that would be catastrophic, you know, globally. So I think you can certainly talk about what that would really do to individuals' pensions and, you know, the actual people that, you know, rely on day to day on like things functioning in a normal kind of flow. So that's, I think that's definitely a fair one. Some other low hanging fruit I think that you could probably get into is like the government really still has no idea what they're doing.
mhm,
And likely the people in this debate round also probably don't know what we're doing with
yeah,
it. Like, I think it's almost fair in this case to like point out this is really too complex to unpack in a 7-minute speech, much less solve in a, you know, in 20 minutes of prep. Like this problem is more complicated. So like unless you have a very simple, straightforward, reasonable regulation, I think that it's probably fair to say that like that's too big of a risk to take, or like that's too much regulation for something that we don't really understand all that well yet.
I think it does open the door for a pretty legitimate discussion about perhaps like a time delay counterplan. There
Sure. Yeah.
might be some way that you can provide like a brink that you have to pass before even thinking about, you know, instituting some sort of regulation. And I can't really think of something off the top of my head because, you know, like sometimes it's like, oh, let's wait until the next election is one of the standard ones I've seen. You know what I mean? Or it could be any other sort of like deadline that is approaching or condition that's clear to be that you can meet in order to
Mm.
wait and then implement the plan. But I can't really think of one off the top of my head other than now's not the time. You know what I mean? Like, and so that's
I
where it
mean, you
starts
could
to get murky.
say maybe say your regulation is something like just I don't know, if you're able to like tax transactions on something. I'm not sure necessarily what that mechanism would be, but if you could say something to the effect of like, you know, every platform out there that allows you to trade, right? So even thing like Coinbase, right? Like that is still a publicly traded entity that's regulated by the SEC. Like that was a big shot in the arm of Bitcoin on that day, like on, you know, any given currency, because that's now a like federally backed mechanism for participating in the game. Like PayPal, you can buy and sell cryptocurrency. Like Chase accounts, you can do that. So the federal government can say like, you know, through any body that is under federal control or like has any federal FDIC backing or any oversight, they have to levy some like minimal fee on top of it. And the bright line, or like the brink that has to be passed is like Bitcoin has to pass $100,000 or something like that, right? Like, so you could peg a particular value threshold, and as soon as a coin surpasses that, then you can have maybe like an escalating fee for transfer rate or something like that. I don't know. It would start to get a little bit messy, but I think that would at least get you out of the like you're going to crash the economy disadvantages, because it's like, hey, if it's trading that high, some people have made so much money already that like the economy ain't crashing. You've got some uber billionaires out there.
Yeah, I know it's tough. I mean, because when you just start researching a topic like this, it's a little technical, not your wheelhouse. You get little hints of strategies. I'm like, oh, maybe I could do something on a spec. I'm like, oh, maybe I could do a little, time delay. It's like, yeah, the econ disadvantage is there, but I really want to develop more. And it's like at this stage right now, I feel it's like it's just everything's kind of floating around, and it's not gelling together as far as a negative strategy goes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I still like I think the most likely is just to have a well flushed out, straightforward disadvantage on like economic downturn. Like
Yeah.
if overregulated, it would hurt the global economy. I think that's very straightforward. And I think any good team should have a brief about that. Like, what are the likely pitfalls of overregulating crypto, and who that would hurt? Like, write out that impact scenario. I think that's a good starting point, and that'll probably start branching out some useful new ideas for you of like, if these are the common things that we should be avoiding, cool. Well, what plan does avoid those things and still accomplishes some good? Like, basically, in researching the downside, you're probably going to come up with a couple good like upsides.
Yeah. I mean, that was where I was. I mean, the A-spec stuff is something that's kind of intriguing. Like, I'd want to look into a lot more, and like, what's the disadvantage for calling it a security versus calling it property, or calling it currency,
Sure.
or a commodity or something like that. And so
Yeah.
that's something I just didn't have time to get into, but it seems fascinating from a debate standpoint. You know what I mean? It's like,
Right.
holy moly, an A-spec like debate that like actually has implications in the arguments and stuff like that. Holy moly.
I think that would be, honestly, I think it'd be a kick butt policy topic. Like, I
Yeah.
think it'd be a killer, because it's something that you want some really good deep research on, and like you want your round to be able to unpack something deeply and everyone to get smarter at it. Like, I think, just as an aside, I love, in some ways, like I prefer certainly like the limited prep debates, but I love that the year-long type debates just focuses thousands, if not like tens or hundreds of thousands of like smart young people's brains on a particular problem. I kind of love that. Like, that makes me happy inside to know that like out there in the world, there are the thousands of students that know a whole bunch about 5 years ago's policy topics. Like, they can really speak deeply to any of those given things. Like, that's pretty cool. I like that, and I hope for more of that. So I think like big problems should be unpacked with policy, like year-long policy topics. I hope crypto finds its way in there.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, we haven't even talked about the critiques on these things. I mean, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's clearly, huh?
I think that like if you wanted just to get into the like access debate, I think the like most straightforward, some of the more straightforward critiques would be like, this levels the global economic playing field like a cryptocurrency does, and regulating it puts the the rules and all the favor right back in the existing powers that be, right? So like when El Salvador, that is not a global superpower, now is like so crypto friendly, that provides so much opportunity for growth and like commerce and like proving that new things can function. It doesn't have to be this really like messed up system of basically the G6 calling all of the shots. So I think that allows for more interesting access debates. So like there's maybe some like critical ground there about like neocolonialism and like how we get to like use the International Monetary Fund to decide who does and doesn't get access to certain tables, and like crypto is like kind of a great equalizer.
I like the colonialism stuff made me think about how you mine coins, and how
Yeah.
like the actual act of mining coins generates so much electricity that it's becoming an environmental hazard. And so
Ooh,
like
yeah, that's true.
where those mining operations happen is not in Bel Air, you know what I mean? And so like the actual local environments, holy moly, that seems like,
Yeah, like whatever power source the country that's doing the most mining whatever powers that country is about to go way bigger if mining operations dramatically increase. Yeah.
Yeah,
Ooh,
I
I
mean,
didn't consider that.
if you make something more valuable, so maybe like tanking some of these coins, you could actually turn that into an
Yeah, but like good.
environmental advantage. Huh. Wow. Oh man, of course we just
Well, and like
tripped.
most currency is printed on paper, if not like some combination of cotton. So it still like requires you to kill a ton of plants and water said plants. So like I wonder, like if you really weighed out the environmental body bags of like mining a Bitcoin versus like printing $1 million or something.
Yeah. Oh man.
There's some really
God.
neat directions to go there. I think
Yeah,
also
yeah.
there's
I mean,
like some
it's
fun
definitely
classic
easy
like
to-
capitalism critiques of like if you were to regulate the hell out of this, it would crash things like, yeah, how much can we crash it? Like
Yeah.
how can we get to zero, right? Because I've heard some interesting
Oh
scenarios
wow.
there of like the economy is too resilient, nothing the government team does can be drastic enough to actually crash it. So we've got to do this like super extreme version to actually crash stuff. So like I
Yeah.
wonder if crypto is like an access point in there just because
Oh
it
man.
is so
Yeah. I mean, like straight up, what was that show called? The F Society show. What was that? With Rami Malek. It was
oh,
man, Robot, Mr. Robot.
oh okay.
That had a whole story about cryptocurrency and stuff in there, and like it was
Oh.
this like really dystopian view of the world about corporations kind of taking like, I mean, think about who would benefit the most from this. Those freaking hedge funds that already have invested heavily into it, Facebook with its lira,
Yeah.
like think about the companies that would benefit from it. It's not going to be a whole hell of a lot of individuals, and sure as hell not going to be poor people. Like, how many
Mm,
Bitcoin do you think they have, right? And
yeah.
so, like, wow, yeah,
Especially like when you have to basically have access to the internet and all kinds of other,
yeah,
just first world connections in order to even play the game compared to like theoretically anyone that can hold a dollar can participate in that economy. Hmm.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, okay, so I think that the critical angles would get pretty interesting too.
yeah. How did we not talk about that until the last 3 minutes?
Stoppage time.
All right. Well, whatever's. Um, everybody, that is our show. We will see you next week. We got Tim CV. We got Jared Kubika Miller. See you later. All right.